All right, I think it's going, so we can begin. Let me just check one thing. Newark. All right, cool. We're live on Facebook. All right, so I'd like to thank everyone for coming to our conversation with Lambda Legal. So this is, right now it's Newark Pride Week. My name's Rachel. I'm the LGBTQ Liaison Librarian at the Newark Public Library. So basically last year, the Newark Public Library opened a space in the first floor of the library. It's the LGBT Resource Center. And also we have partnered with the Newark LGBT Community Center, who has their offices right in that room with the library. So that is a pretty cool partnership that we've started and continue for the next few years. So this week is Newark Pride, as I said, and we wanted to branch out and have conversations with people that are important to the community. So I want to introduce Avatara. They go by they, them pronouns, and they are, well, I'll let them describe their whole thing.
All right, I'll take it from here. So yes, my name is Avatara Smith-Carrington. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Tyron Garner Memorial Law Fellow with Lambda Legal. Currently, I am based in Dallas, Texas, but I was born and raised in New Jersey. And looking forward to this conversation, just to provide a quick bit of background. Lambda Legal is the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization dedicated to pursuing impact litigation, policy, and just public education on behalf of LGBTQ folks and all people living with HIV. So again, I am really looking forward to this conversation, especially because one, I'm a big supporter of public libraries, but also I can't pass up a chance to actually be in conversation with folks from my home state.
Cool, well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I guess just to talk a little bit about Newark. So right now we're doing Newark Pride, and one of the big factors in the queer community of Newark is the murder of Sakia Gunn, and that happened in May of 2003. And as a quick backstory, she was a teenager that was murdered because she was a lesbian. That's the gist of the story. And that occurrence is what was the catalyst for people to start being active in the Newark community and starting Newark Pride. And then a few years later, starting the community center, because it was apparent that it was important to stand up for a community that needed to be heard in Newark. So that is a sad event, but it was like the catalyst. So we try and remember her every year during this time, because it was tragic, but it's also like important.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, the beautiful thing in terms of, so for example, I'll just say that I always grew up as a kid going into Newark. So I have family in Hillside, and I had, my godmother who was a teacher in Newark. And so I always loved how beautifully diverse the city is. And then as I was getting older and like thinking about who I am as a person, obviously like Newark provides such a beautiful pathway into different communities. So like thinking about, sorry about that, thinking about like, the LGBTQ community and specifically like Black and brown folks living in the city. So as you were saying, like, the murder of Sakia Gunn in 2003, in many ways, although I was young, I was still like able to like recognize like what was happening, because I believe like, so Sakia was a masculine presenting Black teenager who was essentially murdered because of the fact that she turned down someone's catcalls. And I think that that's like really important to think about that background context, because of the work that still has to be done when we're thinking about the LGBTQ community. In terms of like just like the different harms that can befall folks. So, to kind of wrap that up, the one thing that I love to do, especially when I'm back home, so my my dad and I will go to Top's Diner in Newark, and and so every now and then when he's like driving through the city, I'll see the wheat pasting of Sakia Gunn and other people, and I think that it's always like a beautiful thing to come back to. And also it's just like really interesting because I think, Rachel, we were talking about Rutgers Newark has a project, hopefully. So they have a project that does like the queer histories of Newark. And like, again, I would tell anyone who's like a little bit of a nerd, you should check it out. They're like oral histories of Newark for queer people. And it beautifully walks you through like how the LGBTQ community in Newark has like grown, and like what are people's stories in relationship to Newark and in relationship to their sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yeah, Queer Newark is a great organization, and the library has actually done programs with them, both showcasing the stories that have been captured and also trying to tell the community that they can volunteer to be a person that is a scribe for the stories. So like you can be an interviewer if you don't, like say you don't want to tell your story, but you can help capture that. And it's really cool, and they have training, and they even have, you could even, so there's like tons of stories that are recorded, but they want to transcribe them. So like you can volunteer to be a transcriber. They just do really great stuff, and they have a traveling exhibit that's going around. And I think it's really important, especially for like an urban community, to show who's in their community and like what if you experienced firsthand. It's pretty awesome. Oh, and I see Kristen's here on the chat. She is the volunteer at Queer Newark, and recently like she did a program with us talking about Queer Newark Oral History Project, which is on our homepage npl.org. You can see it in the list of pre-recorded programs, but yeah, it's a great project. We love it.
It's also amazing because I think that, the one thing that's super important when recognizing, especially in the law, when thinking about like what's next, is also like just turning to like our like shared history. And in many ways, it will be different for different communities, because obviously we know that the LGBTQ community is not a monolith, that we have people who hold like different identities. And so like, and thinking about this talk and like getting ready to like have this chat with you, I was like looking at all this history that's really queer and talking about Newark. And it was interesting for me to actually do the nerdy part and look at like all the laws and the policies that were in place that that impacted like, LGBTQ people in Newark, because I always think of it as like, okay, so we've made, this much progress, but there's so much more to do. And I think that that's the beautiful thing of having those oral histories, because you honestly, one, get to humanize the type of discrimination that people are impacted by, but you also get to look back and think like, and there's so much more to do, but we can do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it, because as much as everyone says like, oh, look at all the things we've gained, but like even since 2014, like gaining the right to get married, like nationwide, but there's still so much lacking. Mm-hmm. That like, a small victory is great, but we have to remember like just until like last month, we like a lot of people could be fired for being gay at their place. So and that's something like people didn't even like, if you're not queer, like you might not even realize. Like I had people come up to me and be like, wait, what? That's a thing? And I was like, yeah. Thank you. I live in New Jersey, where it was had laws existing already, but 20 plus states didn't. Like,
yeah. And I think that that's like really important. I know we're gonna probably pivot into this. We're kind of pivoting into it already, but the beautiful thing about New Jersey is that there are laws against discrimination, and that in New Jersey, those laws are so broad when you think about usually these types of laws. So sometimes in some spaces or in some states and cities, they stop at sex. And then there's always a conversation of like, okay, well, what does sex mean when we're talking about discrimination? Which I'll pivot and talk a little bit about, the recent win with Bostock and Title VII. But in New Jersey, like the law is so broad when it's talking about like, discrimination in general. It covers sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and a whole slew of things. And then I think that what's really important when you think about those laws is like, okay, so what does that mean in terms of like, what am I protected against? And if you look at laws against discrimination, specifically in New Jersey, it ranges from everything with housing. So like, not being denied access to housing because of your sexual orientation or gender identity, employment, credit, which is a big one that sometimes people don't think about, business contracts. So, it makes me really proud to say that I was born and raised in New Jersey, because it's always great to, one, see a state, and even sometimes at the city level, they'll also have these types of protections as well, but to see a state that is obviously, thinking ahead of the game when thinking about like, how do we actually protect all members of our community. So I think it's always important to think about that and think about there are protections out there already at the state level. And then whenever you're ready, we can pivot to talking about employment a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about like where to go next. So even with Newark itself, they're pretty above bar for most places. So even when I first started last year, I got invited to speak with the Newark Police Department. Has a task force that they were creating trainings for their officers to better serve the LGBT community, especially like transgender and things. So like now officers are required to be trained in this annually, which was like a first in New Jersey. And the attorney general is like wanting the whole state to start doing this as like a blanket thing, not just city by city. And I just really think it was pretty cool to like, that was like my first introduction to like Newark, was that was the kind of group that was formed and policies were being made to protect the community, and asking for input from LGBT people. Because like even reading what they had come up with, there was like terms and things that were like inappropriate, but like they didn't know because they're not part of the community, but they wanted our input to make it the best it could be. So I really thought that was pretty amazing to be part of the community.
I think that the other thing that's really important to know about laws against discrimination, specifically in New Jersey, is that also covers public accommodations, and like that's a conversation I've been having a lot lately with folks. Is thinking about typically there's like no specific federal protection when it comes to public accommodations and protecting folks against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's always great when you see that. I mean, there are very few states, I don't want to like ramble with numbers, but I think 19 states have, public accommodation, like anti-discrimination laws in place. Mm-hmm. And so for New Jersey to have that, and to also be having this conversation in terms of like thinking about the library and library patrons, like that's super important, right? Because sometimes public accommodations laws, they'll cover libraries and other like shelters, and sometimes they don't. And I think when we're thinking about the LGBTQ community, it's important to recognize that for so many people, like libraries are a point of access to so many resources. So for example, like the ability to hop on the internet if you don't have, internet at home, or you don't have like a phone that connects to the internet, or, to have access to all these resources. So, the library has like this amazing LGBTQ center and like all these resources, and like what happens in places where they don't have those types of protections in place, and people are discriminated against, harassed, or like asked to leave these public spaces where we know that there's an abundance of resources and the ability to also connect deeper with community. So I don't know, it just makes me super happy to be from New Jersey, because I'm just like, yes, we're so ahead of the ball when it comes to, at least making sure that on the books, we are saying that, this is not okay. And that hopefully also in enforcement, which is, really important as well, making sure that that message is clear.
Yeah, and I really appreciate living in New Jersey, because I realize how much ahead of the rest of the United States we are in a lot of ways. Like right now in the fall, There's a LGBT inclusive curriculum starting in schools, which is awesome. It's like the second state to do that in the whole United States. I think last year New Jersey like outlawed conversion therapy for minors, which is a huge deal. So it's
you can
better.
also like update your birth certificate, I believe,
Yeah,
as well,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
that just came out earlier this year that you can update your gender.
to have an X marker. Yeah. So again, New Jersey is really like paving the way, and it's beautiful to see.
Yeah. So I guess in that thinking on those terms, how do our state protections interact with federal?
Yeah.
That's like a question that like a lot of people have, especially now with the new federal laws, and then thinking about like what does that mean? Just
Yeah. So I mean, okay, so I'll take it back a little bit and start thinking about like, so what are some really recent wins that we've had so far? What was it? Just recently we had Bostock, which is around Title VII. That decision came down. And I think that that was like a really important moment for us to like really think about like the gains we've made and also like what's next. So with regard to Title VII, essentially, the Supreme Court was going to determine if sex and the meaning of Title VII was to would cover sexual orientation and gender identity. And thankfully, the court agrees that that is supposed to cover sexual orientation and gender identity. So meaning that, in terms of places of employment, like one should not be discriminated on account of their sexual orientation and gender identity. I think that that's in terms of thinking about like how it interacts with state protections, like again, it's kind of like this next buffer of protection, right? Because you have protections at your state level, especially in New Jersey, already including sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression with regard to employment. And so now at, the federal level, when thinking about Title VII, we at least know that that definition or that term sex is meant to encompass as well sexual orientation and gender identity. And like, I think what's important when we're talking about Title VII is that that's a big step forward. But of course, there's always more work to be done because, I look at Title VII as like, that's the point where someone's been employed, they've possibly been harmed or harassed or discriminated against in employment. And like now they have that ability to like, have some type of legal recourse against their employer for that type of harm. I'm always wondering about like, how do we also think about discrimination that might happen on the front end. So like what happens if you're discriminated against in the application process or, things like that. So, I think these conversations are always really important to have, not only in terms of like the wins, but also like what else do we have to do in terms of the work to make sure that we're really being strategic about how to really make sure that everyone is moving up with us as we like have these wins, especially because we know of the way that trans folks, LGBTQ people living with disabilities, Black and Brown LGBTQ folks, how they also experience discrimination in really layered ways as well. So that was a big win in terms of Title VII, but of course, there's always more work to be done. And I think that obviously Lambda Legal is going to be there to make sure that we keep on pushing and pushing and pushing to expand how much the law can do for the whole community. So yeah, that's a big step forward in terms of employment.
Cool. I'm glad you clarified about, because I've had someone like one of my family members ask me a question about like, so that law applies to current employment, but like, what about, does it apply to like an interview process? And I was like, I don't think it does. And that's like a huge thing that needs to be addressed, because like even, so like at the library right now, we do this like Thursday LGBT check-in drop-in group just for people to come and talk about what's happening with them. Because like during COVID, a lot of people are stuck in situations that aren't ideal. So it's good to just have a check-in place where it's a safe space with your community. But one of the things that we had a member go through lately is having a job interview that like everything was fine. It was on the phone, blah, blah, blah. They were like pretty much like, oh, I'm going to hire you. Then when he came in, because he's like a Hispanic gay male that's like very flamboyant and whatever, but like they didn't know that until they met him, and then all of a sudden it just dropped, like, and he did not get the job. Like, it's so frustrating.
And I think that
that's
this
like
is a good yeah, and that's also a good plug. And I think I know Zakia is on this Zoom call. So the one thing I would be remiss to if I didn't share is that obviously Lambda Legal has like a help desk, and so we encourage folks to if ever you experience discrimination in that type of way, or you feel as though like something has happened to you, please reach out to us, because things like that are not okay, right? Like someone shouldn't pretty much be denied access to a stable and secure job just because in the phase of applying and like having those interviews, like discrimination arises there instead of once they actually get the job. So like that's a good point, and I would always encourage folks, and hopefully we can share some more of that information. But again, please feel free to reach out to us. We have a help desk, and we're always looking to see in what ways we can do more for the community.
Yeah, definitely. And another question that comes up a lot is because we help people with, like, we have a social worker on staff at the library, and a lot of, not a lot, but like we have frequent people coming in needing help with housing. So a lot of times, and it happens most frequently with transgender women, where they are like, how do I find a place that's safe? Or I'm in a place that they're definitely like discriminating against me because I'm a transgender woman. I don't feel safe. But it's like, what do they do then?
Yeah, I mean, that's like a really good point. So I don't know if folks saw it recently, but the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced like a proposed modification to a portion of the Equal Access Rule in 2016. Now, essentially what they announced was like kind of almost willingly giving shelters like free range to discriminate. Now, of course, like I think that's important for folks to know that like the Fair Housing Act still provides certain protections for folks in that space. So like the modification that they're proposing would hopefully not like detrimentally impact people, but the fact that they announced that type of modification is still like egregious, because it's still like letting these like shelters know like, hey, you can move forward in like harassing and treating people that way. And I think it's really, again, in doing this work, I always feel like it's important to center like who in our community is the most marginalized, because I'm a firm believer that if you work from that point forward, you'll make sure that everyone else will have like the protections that they need in order to like thrive and survive in this like space. So as you were pointing out, like transgender people, but specifically trans women, and to get even more into the nitty gritty, Black and brown trans women really do face disproportionate rates of discrimination when it comes to I don't know, like sometimes I just like to say when it comes to just living authentically in who they are. And so that can also show up in, seeking shelter. And because we know about the fact that when it comes to the LGBTQ community, due to harassment, due to things that occur maybe in the home or outside of the home, or even also with the maybe inability to secure stable and gainful employment, that we are sometimes more likely to also be unstably housed or without housing. So, when it comes to shelters that are supposed to be there to make sure that people have a place to lay their head at night when they don't have housing, like the one thing that we should be fighting hard against is making sure that no one faces discrimination when trying to seek shelter. So like rule announcements like those by the department really strike hard, because again, we know how important it is for people to have access to those spaces. And like trans folks should not show up at shelters and be denied sleeping accommodations or be denied the ability to just get a nice rest for a night just because of the fact that they are trans, whether they are a trans man, trans woman, non-binary, or gender non-conforming with gender expression that doesn't align with however someone's looking at them. So, again, that shouldn't happen. I would also say that, New Jersey, again, like with laws against discrimination, like has like some form of a safety net in place for that. But again, I'm always going to put a plug in if that does happen. Like I would definitely encourage people to reach out because again, it's super important that, we really continue to do the work that centers those who are most impacted by these like really discriminatory systems. Also, we're in the midst of COVID-19. Like people need to like sleep in safe spaces.
Yeah, it's a struggle, and I have been thinking about the people that I've worked with, like hoping that they're okay right now. Like it's like, luckily our social worker is still available, like by phone this whole time. So I thank goodness for that, but it's just hard. And like our social worker is like a huge ally in the LGBT community. So like it's all like, it's a great safe space. We run like a teen group together for LGBT teens. So like she's great and like very knowledgeable, but I really appreciate sharing the info about what, because like it's frustrating, but like at least we know now that like we can contact Lambda and have a discussion, even if it's just to ask like, how does this look, or what could be my next step. It's great to know that exists.
Yeah, and it's also important for people to know that, obviously the library is there as well, and to have such an amazing LGBTQ center, because I think that, of course, like it is always beneficial to know that there are supports out there in terms of, who's going to take up the battle when it comes to the law. But I would be remiss if I was to like kind of just downplay like community work as well, because the one beautiful thing that I've been seeing a lot of, especially when talking about like what's happening with COVID-19, is seeing how libraries are providing supportive spaces for people, seeing how like community, just like the LGBTQ community in general, is like how we're coming together to, like support each other. So again, also encouraging folks that, look to see like what's in your city, especially because we know that at least when it comes to the Newark Public Library, y'all are ahead of the game, and you're really creating an inclusive and safe space where people can come and ask questions and see that they have community support.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm most proud of with our space, is that it's somewhere where people can come and like talk freely, like, and ask questions and I've had a bunch of people like about all different topics, like even like based around like talking about like sexuality, or like questions about and like LGBT and straight people. It's like just like to describe the room, I hung up like 15 different LGBT based flags of like all the different, like not just the gay flag, but like all sub flags, like a ton. So it brings up discussion of just, people are like, what are those? Like, can you explain it? And I'll explain it every day, all day. It's fun. And then it makes it like people know that I'm open to educating them, and I'm not like, oh, you don't know, get out of this room. Like it's like one of my favorite things to do is to just show like, I'm here to ask whatever question you want, be it I need help finding a food pantry, or I need help finding this book. It doesn't matter. Like that's why we're here. So
exactly. And also, I will just say that the book nerd in me, like growing up and going to libraries, I always just love the fact that, in libraries, I've been able to find some of those books that have forever changed the way that I even think about sexual orientation and gender identity, from like James Baldwin to Audre Lorde to, even reading like Leslie Feinberg. Like there are just so many books available that, I know that my understanding of sexuality and gender orientation and all that stuff, or gender identity, like that wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the fact that I had these amazing public spaces with an abundance of books around me to like actually just like sit in like the aisles and like grab books off the shelf and just like, spend so much time just reading them. So again, I like big fan of libraries everywhere.
Cool. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, is creating the collection. And now I've been doing books, not fiction, nonfiction, and my newest thing was like building the DVD collection, just like queer movie collection, which has been like a popular thing. And I always tell people like, I'm not the end all knowledge of this. So if you have suggestions, like tell me, because I just want it to be something that like, if you're looking for something and I don't have it, hey, I'll order it. Like I want it to be like the top-notch LGBT collection, So Yeah. And then I guess you were talking about healthcare. So
Mhm.
just I guess in general, what what types of laws and things exist to protect people in terms of like accessing health and or healthcare and because I know in New Jersey certain organizations can deny access to individuals that don't like say it's a Catholic hospital, they can say no,
Mm.
we're not doing this. So is there laws
Mm.
anywhere coming up?
Yeah,
I don't know how it works.
yeah, no, I always like to start with the problem, I guess sometimes. So, recently, again, I'm always like recently because it is really recently. Again, the Department of what is it, Health and Human Services, proposed an exception to Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which would essentially carve out protections for LGBTQ people, but specifically discrimination on the basis of sex, and things that sometimes, again, fall into the definition of sex. So that can be sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, all that. So they proposed that during, again, this like pandemic in terms of COVID-19, where, a major part of like making sure that we keep our community safe is that they have like affordable access to healthcare. But obviously, Lambda actually recently filed a lawsuit challenging that move by the department. So there's a wealth of information out there in terms of like what Lambda has done, and we've also partnered with some amazing partners in that. So, for example, I know that we are partnered with like Whitman Walker Health, which is in DC, and a couple of other community organizations. But the one thing I will say is that, again, being in a state with certain protections, it does provide folks with some comfort to know that if that type of discrimination does happen, that there could be legal recourse. The other side of that is that when we see different departments make moves like these, it's not only like, at least we know like Lambda Legal is going to be there and they'll take on these fights, but it still hurts, right? Because we're recognizing that in real time during, again, a pandemic, our these departments are willing to carve away or take away these protections that are meant to ensure that when we enter into a hospital, when we have discussions with medical providers, when we're in ambulances on the way to a hospital, when we're trying to get the medicine that we need, that when you remove those protections, you pretty much put people at greater risk, not only in terms of like, again, like facing discrimination, but also impacting health outcomes. So again, Lambda Legal filed a lawsuit recently, so we'll be challenging that. But I think it's, again, really important that if folks are facing that type of discrimination, one, always, again, feel free to reach out. Lambda Legal has a help desk, but also, I'm not going to say this enough, but having an LGBTQ resource center in a city, like Newark, is a beneficial thing to have as well, because I think that what's really important is that folks need to actually know what their protections are, because so often people experience discrimination and they don't know what to do because they don't know if they actually have these types of legal protections in order to like say like, hey, this was wrong and actually I can do something about that, or reach out to a group about that. So that's also why I'll say like having a library like this is really important, because so often the way that people can actually challenge laws or challenge discrimination that they face is by also first knowing that like the harm that they're impacted by is actually not okay. It's illegal. So I'm gonna keep on singing the praises of Newark Public Library today, because I think that that is like one way that people can actually be supported and know that they have not only community there, but also an amazing resource.
Yeah, definitely. So the library does have a lot of experience helping people with legal issues just in general. Like we have a reference team that's really knowledgeable to help people get to the next step, where like to figure out where to make a plan and like help them get to where they need to go. So like we suggest the legal services in New Jersey. That's like the broad New Jersey legal aid system, and then like in New Jersey it goes by county. So like Essex County has their Essex County legal aid. So we help people figure out, because a lot of times, like, a lot of people have questions about like housing discrimination or like problems with like eviction or who knows, like it's always different things, like, but we have different programs where we have like the documents, like outlines of documents they might need to get started with, or they meet with someone. So and like I said before, Jessica is our social worker. Like, she's Monday through Friday available by appointment. So if anyone needs that, they just contact us and we set it up. And it's free. So it's pretty awesome. Like, it's a good first step. And a lot of people are way more comfortable coming to a librarian because like we help them every day. And we're a friendly face that they know they can trust to help them find information. So we're very happy to be able to help point them in the right direction and help them be comfortable doing the next step.
Exactly.
And that's like a really important thing. And like, personally, I was in social work before I was a librarian. And I just really feel like being a librarian is like pretty fun because like I love information, but I also love helping people in it. And I get to do both. Yeah. Especially in my position now, being the LGBT liaison, like it's pretty much a dream job, basically. It's pretty cool.
No, I would say, like, again, I feel like we really do empower people when they have access to information. I'll never forget, like, one of like the first little victories I had under my belt at Lambda Legal was around discrimination in employment and coverage for care. And one of the things I'll never forget in talking to the client that we had was that, you know, for them, they were just like, I didn't really know what to do. Like, I didn't know that this was like a thing. I didn't know that it wasn't okay. And the only reason why they knew was because we were having these conversations where we were just like, do you know that your state has this like anti-discrimination protection in employment, and that we can do this and that. And it was really beautiful to see because, again, one, it empowered that person who now knew and also like is out there in community now, like sharing that information. So that way, you know, other people aren't harmed in the same way. But also we were able to like, you know, get a major win on the books in terms of like also expanding coverage in the state for, gender confirming care, and letting it be known that like when those things happen, like there are not only resources out there, but there are organizations and, there are community folks that you can turn to. So in this case, Lambda Legal stepped in and like, helped that person out. But the one thing that you're talking about, Rachel, is that it also is so beneficial to have a library that has a dedicated space for LGBTQ people to actually get those resources and to connect with services.
Yeah, so just in the resource room, we have so many lists and things of different services that are in Newark because we're not the only LGBT place. There's like different healthcare providers like NJCRI. There's like a new Pride Center. There's the African American Office of Gay Concerns. Like there's many groups that have things that people need. And that's the one thing like we like to share that we have. It's like having the information centralized and it's in a room that's like LGBT focused and come and we will hook you up with the knowledge of Newark. And what if you need something, we'll point you in the direction of like where can you get that. And I think that's like a really important thing because a lot of people come in because they have no idea. And like
exactly,
that's like the library is the portal to like a lot of other things. So that's why like I appreciate you guys reaching out and like coming in to talk about what you guys do, because that's an important piece that like I wasn't aware of all the different things until now too. So hey, I'm gonna be telling people about Lambda constantly now too. So
no, I mean, like we appreciate having the chance to actually have this conversation because, again, book nerd here, love libraries. But also I recognize that especially for people in our community, especially for folks who, might not be housed. And so like they see libraries as a way to like rest and to also have access to, the internet and stuff like that. or like for libraries that have these really cool dedicated spaces, I think that it's important for, us to like build bridges to each other, so that way folks know about not only what's happening in the state in terms of the resources that are available, but also like what Lambda can do and how we can actually like have these really beautiful partnerships where information can get out in a way that's actually super beneficial to the communities that we are here to, build with and to fight on behalf of.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things is that like working with the people that come in with questions and are nervous, then I see they come to the space after that repeatedly. So like to just hang out, use because I have some computers in there, come use like, because there's like on the second floor, there's like 50 computers in a lab, but I have a group of people that because like they're LGBT, they're like, oh, I just want to chill in this room.
Exactly.
Like, I'm more comfortable. I can ask you questions about like, it's stuff that the people upstairs could answer, but like if they need help with like a job application or like have a question about like, oh, how do I download these forms or how do I print? Like they just feel comfortable because like the room is like for them, which I think is like so cool. And I just like it. But yeah, I really appreciate you stopping by, and thank you, Gary, for the introduction. I really appreciate it. This was a great thing to do, and I'm glad we could do it during Pride Week. It's very exciting.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's been amazing. Honestly, I feel like this is the most major thing ever for me because I'm not gonna stop saying this. I really do love libraries. So it's like pretty cool that I was able to have this conversation for folks who are patrons of the library. So again, thank you so much. And for anyone who might want information on Lambda Legal, we'll make sure to send it over to Rachel so that way it can get out there. And please don't hesitate to reach out if ever you experience any type of discrimination or if you just have questions or concerns. Again, we have a help desk that's really informative and really helpful.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Stay safe.
Bye, y'all.